In 2024, global investment in clean energy hit a record $2.1 trillion, according to Bloomberg NEF. But who is really leading this revolution? China, which invested $800 billion to expand its infrastructure at an unprecedented pace, or the US, betting on innovation and subsidies with a $330 billion investment. Numbers tell part of the story, but this race began decades ago. To understand who is truly ahead and what it means for the future of global energy, we need to go back in time. In the 1970s, the growing demand for oil drove the global economy. But in 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, the Middle East cut off oil supplies to countries that supported Israel, triggering a global energy crisis. This forced the US and its allies to seek alternative energy sources. Technologies like solar and wind began receiving initial investments, while hydropower dominated the energy mix. Meanwhile, China focused on industrialization, paying little attention to renewables. In the 1980s, falling oil prices reduced interest in renewables, but the environmental impact of pollution became more evident. Then, in 1997, the Kyoto Protocol encouraged the adoption of renewable energy. China's energy transition gained momentum in the 2000s as the country recognized the environmental and geopolitical risks of relying on coal. With the Paris Agreement in 2015, the global shift towards clean energy intensified. Currently, global CO₂ emissions exceed 37 billion tons per year, almost double the amount in 1980. The US was the largest CO₂ emitter until the end of the last century, more than all European countries combined. Meanwhile, China, still in the process of industrialization, maintained low emissions for most of the 20th century. From the 1980s onward, China's emissions began to rise rapidly, driven by Deng Xiaoping's economy reforms, with coal as the primary energy source. In 2006, China surpassed the US in emissions, reaching 6.5 billion tons compared to the US's 5.7 billion. By 2023, China emitted 11.9 billion tons, while the US emitted 4.91 billion. However, per capita emissions in the US remain higher than in China. This raises the question, who is the bigger CO₂ emitter? China with its massive total emissions, or the US with its high emissions per person? 15 years ago, China realized that decarbonization was essential to improving air quality and public health in its rapidly growing cities. Meanwhile, the US, already an industrial powerhouse, faced pressure to cut its reliance on fossil fuels. For China, competing with manufacturers of fuel-powered vehicles, many of them American, was risky, as it meant staying dependent on oil. The solution? A massive push into renewable energy and electric vehicles. Back in 2004, China invested just $2.5 billion in renewables, while the US put in $5.5 billion. However, China implemented aggressive policies such as subsidies and targets to reduce coal dependence, reduce urban pollution, and meet climate commitments. By 2012, China had surpassed the US in renewable investments. Fast forward to today, and China is leading the global energy transition. In 2023 alone, it invested $676 billion, representing 38% of the global total, with $367 billion going into renewables. The country added 280 gigawatts of solar power and 80 gigawatts of wind power, surpassing its 2030 target 6 years ahead of schedule. But challenges remain. China relies heavily on coal, and improving the efficiency of its renewable technology is crucial for sustaining its momentum. The US is in second place, with $303 billion invested in energy transition, but only $85 billion of that went into renewables. In 2023, the US added 37 gigawatts of solar and 7 gigawatts of wind, reaching a total capacity of 430 gigawatts. Despite the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, the US still faces significant challenges in achieving net zero emissions by 2050. The fossil fuel industry's political influence and the fragmented electrical grid remain major obstacles. To meet its climate goals, the country must invest more in energy storage, reform state regulations, and prioritize cutting-edge technological solutions. Until 2014, the United States led the electric vehicle market, but from 2015 onward, China overtook the US and expanded its lead every year. The Chinese government bet on new energy vehicles, a strategy redefined in 2006 to compete with the giants of the automotive industry. In 2023, the global electric car market reached 14 million units, with China leading at 8.4 million, followed by Europe with 3.5 million and the US with 1.4 million. China has also established itself as the largest exporter, shipping 4 million cars in 2023, 1.2 million of which were electric. In 2024, global EV sales rose by 22%, reaching 17.1 million, with China accounting for 11 million. In the US and Canada, sales reached only 1.8 million. Batteries have become a key strategic element in the competition between the US and China. Right now, China dominates about 8% of the global supply chain, from mineral extraction to cell manufacturing. Chinese companies like CATL and BYD control 55% of the world's battery production capacity for electric vehicles. This dominance is the result of strong industrial policies and control over essential raw materials like lithium, nickel, and cobalt. The US, on the other hand, controls only 7.5% of the global supply chain. To change this, the Biden administration passed the Inflation Reduction Act, allocating billions of dollars to boost domestic production. Companies like Tesla, in partnership with Panasonic and GM with Ultium cells, are making major investments. However, the US still relies heavily on China for key raw materials and components. In summary, while China leads investments and innovations in renewable energy, the US continues to face internal challenges. The race is far from over, but one thing is certain: the future of energy will be shaped by these two powers, and the global impact will be immense.